All right.
This is a question that I get a lot when I'm talking about our work, and it's kind of funny because we didn't really set out to start a YouTube channel. Like, I feel like a lot of people they think like, I want to do science communication, I want to do science outreach, and I need to figure out like the best platform for me to do my science outreach, and video sounds really cool, so they like kind of learn all this stuff about the platform and then decide to start building a channel or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, I have been studying neuroscience for almost a decade, and Micah has been doing video editing for longer than that, just for fun, just as a hobby. He made videos starting way back in high school.
Yeah.
And so these were kind of two like separate things that really didn't overlap, because Micah made videos through college, and then after college we did a few video projects together. Micah had a different YouTube channel that he ran on his own that I was very rarely involved in. But then when I got to grad school in 2013, every year my graduate program, when the Society for Neuroscience conference comes to San Diego, we host a big party. So we rent a nightclub and we have an open bar, and it's this huge party for all the neuroscientists who are visiting, because the Society for Neuroscience conference is 30,000 neuroscientists. It's a lot of people. So to advertise for our party, it's become tradition that our graduate program makes a parody music video of a current popular song. And that year, my first year of grad school, they were working on the lyrics to their song, and they were going to do a parody of Get Lucky, because of course that was very big at the time. And when they were doing this, I was getting all these emails to the student list, and I was like, well, hey, do you guys need any help with this? Because my partner is really into video editing. This is a hobby of his. And they were like, yes, we need help. So Micah came in and really kind of took charge of the project. So like, other people wrote the lyrics and everything, but Micah did the music and did all the filming, and created this awesome video that went sort of viral in the scientific community, called Get Data. And we had a lot of fun doing that. And then a few months later, a friend of mine in my grad program sent me an email. He was like, hey, you should check this out. And it was a link to the Brain Awareness video contest through the Society for Neuroscience. And we were like, that sounds kind of interesting. So we decided to give it a shot, and we wrote a script. And it took me so long to write that first script. It took me like a month to write it. And because I'd never written something for science outreach before. I think I'd written like one blog post, but it wasn't like hugely detailed or anything. It was just whatever. And we filmed it while we were visiting Rocky Mountain National Park. So we filmed it like in an alpine meadow, which was really fun.
That was cool. That was like a beautiful place to film.
But yeah, we entered it in this video contest, and we won second place that year. And then we did another video contest, the Flame Challenge, and didn't get anywhere with it, but we were just having a lot of fun making these videos. And so we started talking about it, and we were like, well, what if we made a channel where we do this? Because at the time, this was in 2014 and 2015, if you searched Introduction to Neuroscience on YouTube, you really didn't get a lot of content. And what you did get were recordings of college lectures, like an hour long, just like an instructor at a blackboard, whatever. And so we were like, well, can we take these concepts, and instead of it being an hour-long lecture on a whiteboard, can we break it down into a 5 to 7 minute long video, and then use animations to help clarify this stuff, to make it easier for people to understand? And that was what we started with. So that was like the first Neuro 101 series that we did, and then we just kind of kept going from there.
I think I remember pretty similarly, like you were saying, I was doing this channel. It was like a comic book channel, and prior to that I did other video stuff, and we did like the 48-hour film project, which was always fun, where you just go all out for 48 hours to try and create a short film. And I just love doing that stuff. And so when we did the music video, when we did the these contests, it just sort of like, I don't know, woke something. And I think we really liked working together. It was really fun to create stuff together.
Yeah, because I'd helped with a couple of your videos in the past, but it was mostly an independent project for you.
Yeah.
And then I got interested in doing more writing. So.
Yeah, and I think we just noticed that there was a need out there for digestible neuroscience content. You know, that's sort of why we chose the motto that we have. You know, like, it's not rocket surgery, it's brain science. Because
that was all Micah, by the way.
Yeah.
If you're wondering where that dad joke came from.
But it's true. I mean, like, when you say, if you introduce yourself as a neuroscientist to someone, their eyes gloss over, right? Like, it's just sort of like, there is sort of a perceived barrier there, I think.
Yeah. I get a lot of, you must be really smart.
Right.
And I'm like, well, I mean, at this, because I've been doing it for a very long time. You know, I have studied neuroscience for a long time, so yes, I'm familiar with this content.
Right.
The same way that someone who's been an engineer for a decade is very good at engineering.
Yeah.
You would hope.
But I think that the value of the channel is to sort of break that, right? To sort of reduce the, for lack of a better term, the stigma, I guess, against neuroscience.
To break down the barrier.
Yeah. To make it approachable, to make it something that other people feel like they can engage in and understand and be a part of. And we've actually seen that from you guys, from the audience. We get a lot of contact from aspiring scientists and also people who are already in the field who say, you know, this is great, keep doing what you're doing, and we hope to keep doing that.
Yeah.
So
a lot of students.
Yeah.
So thank you to all the students. I mean, we're really glad that you find this to be a useful resource. I wasn't sure that this would actually be that helpful for students in neuroscience because we don't really go that in depth on topics, but it seems like people find these to be kind of valuable primers on things when you're studying for tests. It's sort of a good refresher to remember some of these concepts. So We're glad that people find it useful.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And well, we'll see what the future holds. We'll talk about that more later. So what was the journey like from when we first decided to create the channel, right? We sort of decided on a name, right? After we had these
I came up with the name. I was very proud of that.
Yeah, and it's a good name.
It's a good name.
It's a hard name to write.
Well, it's just
but
long.
It's a good name. But from that point, from when we like made the channel to now, what's that journey been like? You know, because a lot has happened over that time.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. It is hard to be a full-time graduate student and have a YouTube channel. And it's hard because, well, it doesn't have to be hard, but it does when you're trying to create videos at the frequency and quality level that we are aiming for. So it has been a journey, and you know, if you look at our post history, you can see it hasn't been perfect. You know, we didn't post a video over the holidays this year, and we didn't even post an explanation for why that was, and it really is because the holidays slowed down and we were traveling. You know, it's just we didn't have the time to do it. So a lot of it has just been trying to find that balance. I think that we've gotten better at creating things quickly and sort of identifying ways in which we can fill holes in our schedule. One thing we haven't not really gotten better at that we were trying to work on is planning further out. So just thinking, you know, we had our first series where basically I wrote all of the scripts for the whole first Neuro 101 series, which was like 5 or 6 videos, and then we filmed them all at the same time. And then Micah just had all of this video that he could edit, and so he could kind of do that on his own schedule. But now we sort of operate more about a month out is sort of our like limit, and even that's not perfect. Like we sometimes find ourselves 2 weeks before we have a video going up and we're like, oh, we have to come up with a video.
And we have gotten better at that. I would say that we usually have plenty of ideas.
We have tons of ideas, we just don't have scripts ready.
Right.
And part of that is because, you know, again, we both have full-time other jobs. Micah's been starting to create these Micah Psych videos, which is great, but it means that we then have to sort of find the balance of who's going to do what for this episode. Whose video is this going to be? Whose episode is this going to be? What's it going to look like? And then I also write scripts for other YouTube channels, so that can take time away from writing for Neurotransmissions. And I work on other outreach projects as well. So there's just a lot on our plates that can make it hard for us to stay on top of things, but I like to think that we get it together in the end.
Yeah, I think that we do a pretty good job of sticking to our schedule, and I've gotten, I mean, the longest part is the editing.
Yes.
And that's been one of those things where I've personally had to improve just over time to make sure that things get done on time, and that I'm not spending every possible minute only doing that. And that's been something that I've been learning, and I've luckily gotten a lot better at what I do, a lot more tools that sort of speed up the process, and it's been nice. I mean, now we can have more flexibility in terms of like, if friends invite us over, we can go and do stuff.
Yeah, we've definitely gotten better at doing things quickly. Like I can write a script in a couple of hours now, and I try not to just do that because I think that it means that my research isn't usually as careful. But what I often will do is I will do some reading, and then I'll do some reading on a subject, and then I will just sit down and write the script. Like it doesn't take me a ton of time to plan everything out.
Right.
We've gotten better at outlining our concepts. Mike has gotten better at time management with the editing, because that is by far the most time-consuming thing. And just figuring out how to distribute content after it's up on the channel. So many Sunday mornings when a video goes up, we are in here posting it on all the social media and using hashtags and trying to get some views. But it's nice because we're not trying to do it full time, right? So we're not trying to make a living off of it, which sort of removes some of the pressure.
Right.
I think at the same time, it can hold us back a little bit, because it's like, well, we're not out here trying to get 100,000 or 1 million subscribers. We're not out here trying to get a viral video. But it does mean that we can sort of do things at our own pace and decide how we want our videos to go and how we want them to look. And if we miss a week, it's like, okay, well, we missed a week.
Right. Yeah, there's advantages and disadvantages to it not being our livelihood. Like the advantages, we don't have to depend on video and the success of that video for being able to eat, or
Yeah, we don't worry about getting demonetized the way that other creators do.
Exactly. But at the same time, obviously that means that we don't upload as often, and it means that maybe we just don't put as much like focus into the advertising side of things, which is fine. I'm actually okay with that. I think that for me, it's the usefulness of the content that people will see it and will search for it and look for it when they need it. And that's actually what we've seen with our audience, is that the people that do watch our videos are typically the people that are searching for it, which is good. You got cat hair all over me?
Cat hair all over me.
So, I mean, for me, like, I remember coming up with the channel, and it was such an exciting process, like when we first created it, because things were sort of petering out with my other channel. I wasn't creating as much. I was starting a new job, and I was looking for that next creative outlet, like that next thing to do, and this just seemed like such a cool opportunity. And then when we started it, I feel like we got such a positive response from people, when it first began, and even throughout the entire thing. And at times it's hard. There are a lot of late nights, getting things done, staying on top of deadlines. But at the same time, it also, I think, taught, at the very least me, sort of some discipline in terms of like, this is what goes into creating the video, and making sure that I'm being consistent and even improving my skills over time. So it's been really good.
Yeah, I think a huge part of the journey too has been learning how to work together.
Yeah.
It's really not an easy task to, I mean, if you don't know, we're married to each other. And it's a really interesting thing to have to learn how to essentially operate a small business with your partner. Because, there are a lot of choices that have to be made, and in some ways being with your partner can make it easier to make those decisions, but it can also make it harder. So it's really been interesting. I think we've gotten, early on there was a lot of discussion and a lot of like back and forth about a lot of things, but I think in general now, after a couple of years, we're on the same page for most things, and we sort of have like our areas of expertise, sort of the things that we defer to each other on, and definitely that has gotten a lot smoother too. And it's really fun, I think. I don't know, I like it. I can see how it could be really difficult and maybe even hard, like bad for some people's relationships, but I think for us it's been really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're always not always, but we're usually on the same page about stuff.
Yeah. But we've also learned how to have productive conversations when we're not on the same page.
Right. And I also think that there's a decent division of like labor that, we're not stepping on each other's toes all the time too. So that's also nice because like I know what my job is, you know what your job is, and we both do them very well. So it's just like we can just go from there. Yeah. So
let's answer some questions.
All right. Okay, so we've got a whole bunch of questions from some folks. The first one is, so at the beginning, before we got started, somebody asked who is the composer of the music that we were listening to. I'm going to be posting that in the description. All of that music that you were listening at the front end was Creative Commons music. So I will post all of the songs that were a part of that if you would like.
Dexter Britton.
Oh, is that who it is? Dexter Britton.
Creative Commons Volume 7.
And I'm going to post the URL in the chat right now to the Spotify album if you want to check that out. Oops, that actually did not post. Well, I'll post it later on. But thanks for asking. Next question. Guys, is there any platform or social media that I can join? Like I want to have discussion on neuroscience.
So, I get asked a lot. I talk a lot about social media for scientists and what social media platforms scientists can and should be using. And when I say Twitter, I always tell people Twitter is not a great place to do outreach per se, but it is a really good place to meet other scientists. So if you're looking to have a conversation with scientists about neuroscience or about really any science topic, Twitter is a great place to be. You can search the neuroscience hashtag, you can search the science hashtag. If you follow me on Twitter and then find the people that I am interacting with a lot, most of them are neuroscientists. I don't often have a ton of conversations about neuroscience on Twitter, but a lot of people do. People share papers, people will talk about sort of controversial stuff in the field. So there's a lot of conversation that happens on Twitter. If you're looking more for like but I will say, okay, sorry, backtracking. Twitter is a great place to meet other scientists, but also to be aware that scientists on Twitter are also people.
Right.
So these are people who are going to tweet, like myself included, tweeting about political things and, that great chocolate cake they ate last night and this awesome cocktail they're drinking now. So if you really want to just have like super focused conversations, I would recommend either just looking at the hashtags, like hashtag neuroscience, or you can check out the Reddit's subreddits. So there's our Neuro and our Neuroscience on Reddit.
Yep.
People will post articles or questions or whatever, and then they have conversations. I don't think they're super active.
There's a lot of posting. There's like people comment, but it's not like a conversation.
Yeah, like a super back and forth.
Not super detailed.
But yeah, Twitter is like, for me, Twitter has been primarily a networking tool. I have found mentors and colleagues and all kinds of really great stuff on Twitter. Not so much in the outreach, although there are tons of science communicators on Twitter, but a lot of support as a scientist there. Right. So I think that's a really great place to have conversations. Yeah,
I mean, if you want to talk to either of us directly, I would say that's probably the easiest way to do it is through Twitter, right? It's just through like through sending tweets if you have specific questions. So you can find me on Twitter. Oh, I actually have a little thing for this. Oh, really? Check it out. Yeah. Oh, cool. Bam! So I'm at Ali Astrocyte, and Micah is at MicahPsych. MicahPsych. He did not include our channel Twitter handle, which is at NeuroYouTube. Yes. So yeah, you can check out our stuff there. But again, remember that we are people, so we also tweet a lot of dumb stuff. I try not to complain too much on Twitter, but I'm not always perfect. Yeah, no, that's fair. It is forward-facing, but it's also like more personal, I would say, than the YouTube channel. Like the YouTube channel is very curated sort of content, whereas Twitter is more just like what we're thinking. But But yeah, and I also agree with the Reddit suggestion. There are a lot of subreddits. There's like ones for cognitive neuroscience, or for psychology, for computational psychology. There's just a whole bunch of different subreddits on there for any particular subject. What? So, so if you're looking for something, you can check it out there. Facebook, not great, I would say, for having conversations.
Sorry, we have a cat.
Yeah.
Here.
Let me grab him here. Same thing with like Instagram or Snapchat or something like that. It's just not perfect. But yeah, Twitter's definitely probably the best. Okay, next question.
We're getting some more questions.
Are we getting more questions?
Yeah. Maybe scroll up and see if there are more up there too.
No.
Okay. So the next question we got was, will we do partnerships with institutes or other channels? We have done several collaborations, which is not the same as a partnership, but we've done collaborations with 12 Tone, who's here today. Hi, Corey.
Hey, Corey.
And we've done collaborations with the Psych Show and with Inés Dawson of Draw Curiosity, and we love doing collaborations. It's really fun.
And they're great. I mean, they're just such cool people.
So we have this amazing community of other YouTube creators called We Create EDU, and everyone there is really awesome. So it's not just science communicators. 12 Tone does music theory, for example, but it's just been a great place to meet other people creating YouTube content. A lot of people sort of coming from the same place as us. Most of the people that we know through We Create EDU are not full-time YouTubers, so that's been a really supportive community. We've done a lot of collaborations with people from that community, and we're always looking to do more. And we've talked to a few different organizations. You know, I've been approached a couple times by people sort of looking to have me participate in like advertising campaigns, I guess is kind of the best way to phrase it. We're pretty picky about that stuff because, again, we're not trying to do this full time. So I really would only follow up with an organization if I really believe in their mission. You know, like we got approached by a Nootropics company who wanted to sponsor our videos. And I was like, no, Nootropics aren't real. So yeah, we would do that. You know, like we have done these videos for the Society for Neuroscience brain awareness contest, and have talked to them about other projects that they're working on. So we're open to it. It's just a matter of, you know, making sure that everybody's being represented fairly.
Right.
We did also recently sign up with a group who's going to be selling our content to educational companies.
Right.
So basically our videos are now available for purchase for like digital textbooks, for example. So yeah, just partnering with organizations that we believe in and that we feel like are also going to represent us fairly. You know, because there are a lot of predatory sharing organizations online. Yeah,
definitely. Those what do you call them? Conglomerates, where they like offer you practically nothing but want some of your revenue for joining. Right.
So we're just very careful about that stuff. But you know, it's hard for us too because we are just two people, right? Like I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a content expert. I'm not a YouTube employee. So there's a lot of stuff that we kind of have to figure out on our own.
Yeah, and I would say we've each done like sort of freelance work for institutions and organizations on our own, either video work, in my case, or talks or other things in your case.
Yeah, script writing.
Script writing.
But that is separate.
Right. Yeah, we haven't really done it with neurotransmissions, just because, like you were saying, we want to make sure that the identity remains, but also that whatever we decide for the channel is a good decision for everyone, for us, for the audience, for all parties considered. And I don't think we've quite encountered that, you know, to make it like a really good opportunity.
Yeah. So. That was Bill yelling in the background.
Oh yeah.
Bill is the orange cat.
Somebody asked if it was Bill or Loki yelling, and it was Bill. He's orange. But there's another one floating around here somewhere.
Loki is the Siamese, but he's not in the room right now. But that was Bill.
We have a question that says, "Hello, I'm interested in cognitive psychology and psycholinguistics. Is this a field one can pursue and do research on at the university level?" Great question. So, cognitive psychology, definitely. I mean, I would say both probably.
Yeah, I mean, you could certainly make an argument that, I mean, there's a lot of overlap between psychology and neuroscience and
Yes.
linguistics to begin with.
Right.
So I know that I did my undergrad at MIT. I took a linguistics class there, especially when it comes to talking about abnormal linguistics. You know, basically there are a lot of brain conditions that can affect linguistics, and so
Right.
there's a lot of sort of overlap there. So definitely, I mean, cognitive psych or cognitive neuroscience definitely can be studied at the university level.
That's a huge field. I mean, that's a really large.
Yeah, and I imagine
area.
that any university that has a large linguistics department or
Yeah.
a sizable linguistics department, you could certainly tailor to focus on psycholinguistics.
Yeah, super interesting area of study.
Yeah.
I mean, like, how do we speak? Why do we speak the way that we... I just had a question about this yesterday
Really?
when we were driving. Do you remember this? I was wondering.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you have two broad language types. I mean, there are a lot of variety and whatnot and other kinds, but I was thinking about two specifically of the Romance languages, and you have Germanic languages, right? And English is sort of a mix, more leaning towards Germanic side, with a bunch of other stuff sprinkled in. But in Romance languages, you have the adjective. You're really bored by this, I can tell, but I think it's really interesting. You have the adjective after the noun, right? So you would say like the apple red, right? But in English and in other Germanic languages, you put it before the noun. Why is that? Why did that switch happen?
I mean, it's not a switch. It's just that languages evolve.
Why is there that difference?
Well, if
why
you know,
does that
let us know.
exist? Tell me. Go into that field. Tell me why we have this switch, this change in terms of how we order things grammatically. I think it's super interesting, but I also, another thing that's interesting to me in cognitive, or rather in linguistic psychology, is how do words change how we perceive things?
Yeah, there's a
You
lot
know?
of conversation about that. I'm not a cognitive psychologist,
I know.
so I don't know too much of the research. But there's a lot of theories about how the way we use language affects the way that we understand things and perceive the world, basically.
Right.
Fun fact, UCSD, where I'm a graduate student in neuroscience, has the #1 cognitive science graduate program in the country. So if
Wow.
you're into cognitive science, check out UCSD.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, we've got a huge psych and cog sci department here. So
Crazy.
I mean, there's a ton of overlap. There are people in my department in my graduate program who are very cognitively focused.
Yeah.
I'm a cellular biologist, so like I don't know anything about cognitive psychology, but
I took some classes in cognitive psychology,
Mhm.
but all right. Well, how about this next question for you? What did you study, and how was that?
As an undergrad at MIT, I majored in what they call brain and cognitive sciences. At the time when I was there were actually very few requirements for what you had to take as part of your course of study. So I tailored my education to focus mostly on cellular and molecular neuroscience, as well as like neuroanatomy. Yeah, it was good. I liked my work at MIT. I really enjoyed the classes that I took. I had a hard time. I did undergraduate research. I spent a couple of years doing research with a cognitive lab very early on, where I was mostly just like analyzing data.
Mm-hmm.
And then I spent a year working in a lab that was not a neuroscience lab. I found faculty at MIT very difficult to approach in general, so I didn't feel super connected to the department, but I really enjoyed studying the topic a lot. And now I'm still a graduate student. Now I'm a graduate student at UCSD,
Mm-hmm.
and I study cellular neurobiology.
Mhm.
But it's a very different thing to be a PhD student. I took a few classes at the beginning, but I haven't taken a class, like a real class, in about 2.5 years. So I spend all of my time in the lab. So when I say that I study cellular neurobiology, I mean like I am in the lab looking through a microscope studying my cells. And that's great. I love it. I really love the lab that I'm in. I love the people that I work with. I love the work that I'm doing. So it's awesome.
My history is in undergrad I studied psychology and also Spanish, so I double majored in that. And Spanish was sort of a surprise add-on, but I just really fell in love with the subject with the language, and the teachers were really great. I mean, those were who really inspired me to get into it.
How much of studying Spanish was also motivated by the fact that you could study abroad in Spain?
A little bit,
Yeah.
yeah. So I studied abroad in Madrid for a semester, which was a really cool experience. I got to live with a family and like just sort of dive into the culture. I would say a little bit. I think more of the motivation was I was initially looking at psychology and international studies as like the focus, but that ended up not really being a good fit in terms of my interests, and I think the department wasn't great, so I switched because I thought that there was a good community and because I really enjoyed learning it.
How was studying psychology at college?
In college? My psychology department at my university was large. I think it's pretty large at most colleges, right?
Well, most big schools.
Most big schools, yeah, because a lot of people end up going into it, end up being really interested in psychology. It's a really fascinating subject. But as a result of that, I think it's easy to get lost in the crowd. So I don't think I got as much personal attention in college when that was going on, but it was good. I mean, I think I learned so much during that, and it really inspired me to continue learning. The subject was just so fascinating. So I ended up...
And how about grad school?
Yeah, so then I ended up going to grad school, got my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling with a focus on multicultural counseling. And that was awesome. Really great program, and it inspired me to continue my career. And now I'm a therapist, work with unaccompanied, undocumented children who come to the United States who are seeking asylum. So pretty much all of my therapy ends up being in Spanish, and that's been really amazing. I think that's just really opened my eyes to a whole other side of the world and to the country that I never knew before, and it's been cool to get into those cultures as well.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Pull over some more questions.
All right.
So who were your biggest influences as you started your education and fields of study? So I have, it's funny because I often say that I decided to become a scientist when I was 12. But when I look back on like all the things I was interested in when I was a kid, most of them were very sciencey. So like I wanted to be a marine biologist because I wanted to hang out with dolphins. I wanted to be a veterinarian. That was all like really early on. When I was 12, my grandfather gave me his copy of the book Cosmos by Carl Sagan. And I really just fell in love. That book is beautiful. Carl Sagan's personal joy and wonder in trying to understand the universe really comes through. If you haven't read it, I strongly recommend it. I actually was recently rereading it, and I kind of, this is not facetious, it actually kind of reminds me of a religious text in the way that he sort of reverently discusses the origins of our universe. It's beautiful. And that really got me excited about space. So when I was 12, I decided I wanted to be an astronaut. I was going to be the first person on Mars. I no longer think that's necessarily going to be true, although I do.
You never know.
I do submit an application every time NASA holds astronaut or opens their astronaut applications. I do submit one. But I got to undergrad, and I had planned on studying astrophysics and aeronautical engineering. And I got to undergrad and realized I didn't really like physics very much. And then I took a class. It was just kind of like an accidental, like, I have a humanities opening in my schedule. I should take this humanities class. So I took Introduction to Psychology with John Gabrielli, and he was quite a charming faculty. Just, again, very enthusiastic about his subject. And I thought it was so interesting because it attracted me in this sort of the same way that like Cosmos attracted me, and that there was just a lot of wonder, sort of this like this really incredible experience of like thinking about my brain with my brain, and sort of this like very meta, like, how is this a thing that we can do, and isn't it amazing that we're capable of this?
Yeah.
And then learning about, particularly about disorders that have these really interesting effects on the brain. like damage to a certain area of the brain can cause all these specific language difficulties, and that's how I got very interested in neuroscience.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just kept taking classes, and that's kind of where I got. And then in choosing in choosing to study astrocytes, by the time I got to graduate school, I knew myself well enough to know that I could be excited about a lot of different kinds of research, but I really needed an environment that I felt like it was going to support me both as a scientist and as a person.
Mm-hmm.
I had and have a lot of personal stuff in my life that requires a lot of mental energy that I knew I was going to need space to deal with stuff sometimes. And I rotated with my current advisor because she had interviewed me, and I liked her when she talked about her research. I thought it sounded interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked if I could do a rotation with her, and then when I rotated with her, I just really appreciated, and she gave me a lot of direct personal attention. We had meetings once a week to talk about my work. And she made it really clear that she wanted me in her lab, and that mattered a lot, to feel like I was valued and that I was wanted in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just got really excited about astrocytes, because to me, astrocytes are we're with astrocytes where we were with neurons 20 or 30 years ago,
right.
in that we really just don't understand very much about their roles in the brain and how they are influencing the brain health and signaling within the brain. So there are all of these really open questions that a lot of people are working to answer, but so many things that we don't understand yet. We've just started learning about the fact, there are tons of different kinds of neurons in your brain depending on what brain region you're in.
Right.
And we're just starting to understand that is also true of astrocytes, just in the last couple of years. So it seems obvious, but until you actually do the research, you can't know that. So I'm excited to be a part of a field that is true.
Yeah. Influences. I was lucky enough that when I was in high school, I had a lot of really great teachers in different subjects. So I had Mr. Lotz, who was a great teacher in history. I had, Mr. Carney, who was a great English teacher, and just all of these people in every subject. And I think that actually caused confusion for me, because I liked everything, and I never felt like I knew where I was going. And then I took an AP Psych class, and that really sort of opened my eyes to this new subject that just seems so cool. So that really inspired me, I think, to pursue it. Mm-hmm. And I think I always knew that I wanted to go into sort of the clinical side of things rather than the research side. And I was inspired by my graduate teachers, and then by my supervisor at my first clinical site. He was just an amazing guy, very caring, very empathetic. Like you're sort of saying with mm-hmm. your supervisor, just believed in me and in my abilities, and really sort of built me up. So that was important, I think, and informative.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah, I know that there was a time when you sort of thought about pursuing a PhD
yep.
in psychology, but ultimately, at least at this point, sort of realizing that having a master's degree and being a therapist rather than doing the research is really where you want to be.
Right. So. And that's, it's not off the table, but
yeah.
I really like what I do, and I think it's been fulfilling for me. So, all right, next question up here. Which are your favorite books of science, and what are they about?
Oh,
you talked about Cosmos.
Yeah, Cosmos is all time one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Carl Sagan's incredible.
Yeah.
I also really enjoy pretty much anything by Oliver Sacks. Similar to Carl Sagan, I think he's a very charming writer, and a lot of his sort of excitement about his subject really comes through. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know anything about Oliver Sacks, he also is just kind of a fascinating person in his own right. Radiolab has done a lot of interviews with him.
Yeah.
So he had a very interesting sort of life trajectory.
Yeah.
And I read a lot of sci-fi too, but when I read, usually I'm reading for pleasure more than anything else. So
yeah, I
read a lot of sci-fi, but mostly because I like the ways in which sci-fi can be used to tell stories about people. So yeah, I would say Sagan, Cosmos, and Oliver Sacks' work. What about you?
Well, I don't read a lot of science books. Sci-fi a little bit,
yeah.
And comic books. So I really enjoy like Incredible Hulk stuff because I think it's just fun.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy seeing how sort of science gets portrayed in that genre because it's very boundless, like you can do anything with science, and as long as you write it well enough, people, it's believable, and it's sort of amazing. So I enjoy that. Same thing with like Spider-Man, Jurassic Park, just like that really appeals to me because I like the idea of science being this open world where we just haven't explored it enough to get to that point. Obviously there's some things that just like aren't possible, but I think that's where I get most enjoyment rather than watching just reading pure science books.
Speaking of science and comic books, First Second Comics is producing a series of science-themed comics. They've released several already and several more coming out, and in October they will be releasing a comic book about neuroscience, and I wrote the introduction for that, so you should check it out. I think that one's available for pre-order, and like I said, they have other books available now. They're targeting sort of middle school age kids, but the neuroscience one that I read seemed like a really great sort of primer in neuroscience, a lot of like very basic sort of understanding of how the brain works and everything. So it's a really kind of great resource, or will be a great resource for anyone who just wants to sort of have a little bit of an underlying understanding of the brain. So if you're interested in science and comics, there are people creating really cool science comics now.
Awesome. We are getting tons of questions. Keep them coming.
Yeah, we better start answering some more.
I know.
We're running out of time.
All right, so here's the next one. I am studying in systems engineering. This is my last year, but I want to move to neuroscience engineering. Is it possible? Mm-hmm. How can I work on myself in order to get a master's degree on it?
So a couple of things. I can really only relate from my personal experience, but my understanding of most neuroscience, like if you're thinking about eventually, if you just want the master's degree, mm-hmm. I don't really know about neuroscience master's degree because I did not get a master's degree. But I would say systems neuroscience has a lot of overlap with systems engineering, and in particular there's a ton of work being done in computational neuroscience right now, as well as biomedical engineering. Mm-hmm. So I would look for classes that sort of bridge your interest in that way. So looking, like, I don't know if your interest is more in the computational side. Systems neuroscience is a huge field right now, trying to understand how the circuits in the brain are interacting and functioning. So if you can take a few classes on those subjects, or any kind of like extracurricular activities related to that, that would be great. Definitely look into the individual master's programs and see what their requirements are, what kinds of classes you have to have taken. I'm sure that you have to have taken basic underlying biology and chemistry mm-hmm, classes. Mm-hmm. But I know people who came into my neuroscience PhD program who did not have a biology degree. Like, these were people who were coming in, I think one person had a computer science degree, at least one person. So just check out the prerequisites. But you can also contact them and just ask, say like, here's my interest, here's why I'm thinking of this switch, here's what I am interested in working on. And usually they can give you an idea of what you need to do to get ready for that.
Now, I don't know if this is true in neuroscience, maybe you can sort of help me out, but in psychology, a master's degree tends to be more like applied, like you do it in order to practice in the field.
I really have no idea. Most people I know who did master's degree did it because they needed to boost their grades in order to get into a PhD program.
Gotcha. That makes sense. All right, well, what she said. Next question is, how much contact have you guys had with the work of Jung, Freud, other psychoanalytic thinkers in your studies? Why do you think that this field has receded from mainstream psych studies? Ooh, my favorite.
I have not had any contact. It's really not a part of my work at all.
Yeah, not part of you've encountered it in the culture probably. But
yeah, of course. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
Exactly. And dream analysis and all that good stuff. Mm-hmm. So from my side, so I actually did a video on psychoanalysis that focused pretty heavily on Freud's perspective on it. So I didn't go as much into Jung's psychoanalytic theory because his evolved out of Freud's initial theory. But I don't really encounter it much except for in an educational way. I don't really encounter that in the field. The reason for that is because it's just there's a lot of reasons for that. Psychoanalytic practice and theory and therapy is expensive. It is extremely long, and it requires a lot of time commitment from the person to like attend 4 or 5 sessions a week. So it's just not really practical in today's age with people, being working. Yeah, exactly. But also some of the underlying theories of psychoanalytic theory have been disproven.
Well, that field is also like extremely like white heterosexual male centric, right?
Also,
in general, like its understanding of psychology really comes from this very specific perspective, and because it's sort of fallen out of fashion, no one's really we really don't know if that would work in other populations.
Right. It also just doesn't really mesh well with American culture, I don't think. It was developed in Vienna because that's where Freud was born and grew up and whatever. But the reality is it's very focused on sex as sort of a focus of it, like people's dreams or underlying thoughts. And I don't think that's really I don't think that appeals to as many people in today's world as well. So there's a lot of different reasons why it just doesn't get practiced as much anymore, not least of which because it's just not very practical.
Yeah, and there are very effective other forms of treatment.
Exactly.
So.
Oh, that's another reason, because it's not really evidence-based. So there hasn't been much research on psychoanalytic theory, so insurance companies just won't pay for it. Yeah, exactly. So they'd rather go with cognitive behavioral therapy or something else that has the research to back it up. So.
Okay.
All right, next question. I think I heard you say nootropics aren't real. So I'm curious, if so, I'm curious regardless whether you would do a video on them.
Yeah, that might actually be something worth doing. The same thing is nootropics kind of fall in the same category as brain training, which is to say, it is not necessarily that there is no effect, it's just that the effect probably isn't any better than stuff you can do yourself for free. So nootropics kind of hinge on this idea that if you take this drug, I think it's usually a drink, if you drink this drink, it'll help you focus more and get your work done. A lot of times that is some kind of mixture of various electrolytes, salts and sugars, and caffeine. So you couldn't make yourself a cup of coffee and get that caffeine without paying $3 or $5 a bottle. And the reality is just that the evidence isn't there that this stuff makes that big of a difference. Yes, caffeine is good for your focus. It's a painkiller. It helps you kind of perk up. That's true. But nootropics sort of market it as we have the perfect balance of electrolytes for your brain, and it's going to help you focus and stay smart. Smart Water does this too. And the evidence isn't there. And the same thing with brain training. Brain training, the research that exists shows that when you do brain training work, you get very, very good at the specific task that you trained to do. So yeah, you can train your brain to be good at things. But in terms of long-term effects, when you do brain training exercises, there's really not any evidence that it's going to protect you against dementia or keep your memory sharp when you get older. Really the only, the things that there are good evidence for protecting your brain as you age are a good diet and exercise. Those are really, and keeping active, reading books and doing puzzles. And so yeah, brain training can be a part of that, but what I think when I say it's not real, it's more just there's a lot of this marketing that packages these products to say this is good for your brain, and it's well, sure, but you're acting like this is the only thing that's good for your brain,
right. And
it's not.
Yeah, I think my main problem with nootropics is that they overpromise. It's they say it'll not only if it has caffeine, not only will it make you more alert and focused, but also it will, I don't know, curb appetite, and it'll or make you lose weight, or it'll I don't know, help your. It promises so much that is unproven, and all they have to say is, it's supported by science and
Yeah, and a lot of times these
people believe
companies will have like a neuroscientist on staff,
Right.
and that's sort of how they like bolster their credibility. Like we have, staff neuroscientist who's developed this product, and like that's great, that's great and fine and whatever, but it's sort of forcing this credibility that is kind of frustrating to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
What are some other channels you two watch that teach less academic topics, such as Every Frame of Painting, PBS Ideas
Ooh.
Channel, Captain Christian, etc.? So
what YouTube channels do you watch?
this is probably the time to confess that I am not really huge on watching videos. And my excuse for that is that I'm a very, very fast reader. So I prefer to read content than watch content because I can read faster than I can listen. So, I mean, I mostly watch educational content. I watch, I watch a lot of SciShow, and I like the Vlogbrothers, but I don't really watch a ton of YouTube unless I'm watching, like, dumb cat videos. I also sometimes get emotional and sit and watch, like, videos of, like, kids asking their step-parents to adopt them, or like soldiers coming home from the military, but I don't have like specific channels. Micah has a lot more than I do.
Yeah, I watch a lot of YouTube, and I listen to a lot of podcasts as well. Podcasts are
that's a whole other thing. We're not going to talk about podcasts.
Oh, okay, fine. But to Allie's point about reading faster than she can watch or listen, I actually speed up my podcasts so that I can listen to them more. So some channels that I really like to watch, How to Make Everything, which is sort of a popular channel. It's like it has like this engineering student, and he tries to make things from scratch, which I find pretty entertaining. It's not usually successful, but it's pretty fun.
I will say one channel I like that Micah watches, so I kind of watch it too, is Flopatron.
Oh, Flopatron, which is amazing.
It's basically this person made an orchestra out of computer parts, and it's amazing.
It like has all these floppy disks and somehow rig them up into a code and can like play popular music off of it, which is just really fun.
You also watch that Primitive Technology channel.
Primitive Technology,
which is, I guess, kind of
love.
an educational channel. But
it is somewhat educational in a subversive way, or like you don't know that you're really learning, but like you see somebody essentially create something from nothing.
Yeah.
Now you see it, which if you watched Every Frame of Painting and you're missing that in your life and you want another channel to check out, that's who I would look for, because he sort of does a similar thing where he examines film or like film techniques. What else do I watch? Melodica Men, which is these two guys
who play
melodicas.
Yep.
Which they're really talented. Yeah, just a whole bunch of different channels. I'm not really restricted, I guess, in terms of what I will watch. So all sorts of stuff.
So we are getting close. We were going to do this for an hour, but we've had enough questions. I think we should keep going for a little bit longer. But we do have to be done at 11:30 our time. So just so y'all know, we'll keep trying to answer questions.
Well, let's keep
Yeah,
busting
keep
through
going.
then. What would you put a computer chip in your brain to have a brain PC interface if there was no physical risk?
That's a good question. I mean, that question is very open-ended. It doesn't really specify like what I could do with that computer chip. I will say that I am not the kind of person who's like super worried, like, and I know, like, trust me, I totally understand why people are concerned about like technology, like the Amazon in-house Alexa system and all of that stuff. Like, there's security issues around that. I am not a person who's super concerned about that, so probably I would, just because I know that if somebody were to come to me and be like, hey, we could put this computer chip in your brain and you could do X, Y, and Z, and I'd probably be like, that sounds rad. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would be interested, especially if there's no physical risk. What would prevent me is exactly what you're talking about, security risk.
Yeah.
So I think it would have to be not connected to the internet, right? And it would have to essentially just do like updates.
Yeah, there would also be like a whole other element for me of like how long term would it be, right? Because like at least currently our brain machine interfaces are not, they don't last very long.
Because they
so,
just dissolve, or because
no, because they get clogged up.
Gotcha.
So I mean, our body is like, hey, this is a foreign object, we should get rid of it.
Right.
And attacks it. Hey, Bill.
Hey.
And in that case, it's like, well, would it even be worth it to get it installed?
Yeah.
We have a Godzilla cat in the camera right now.
He's huge.
Next question.
Next question. What do you think about the concept of erasing and implanting memories? Ooh.
I mean, it's a real thing, right? Like people can have false memories.
Right.
That's a real phenomenon. I don't know that much about the subject, but it's not crazy, right? Because if you think about it, everything we see and experience in the world comes in through our sensory systems, and it gets processed by our brains before we're capable of consciously recognizing anything around us. So we could make this argument that our lives are basically a virtual reality experience, because all the information we get gets filtered through our brains before we understand it. So from that perspective, yeah, you can affect that reality by changing the way that your brain processes information. So yeah, they're real phenomenon, totally. I don't think it's great. I mean, so how I feel about it, true story, I got kicked off of a jury because I said that I wasn't going to accept a single witness's testimony as enough to convict a person. And apparently legally, you can convict someone on the testimony of a single witness. And I said, I was like, I'm a neuroscientist. I know that witness testimony is not reliable. I can't do it with just one person. And so they asked me to leave. Mm-hmm. So that's how I feel about it.
I have a great educational video to watch about this. It's called Inception. I'm just kidding. No, I think we have seen this in real life. Erasing memories. Trauma victims will often suppress memories, or they'll get jumbled and details will get sort of messed up. So often when people recount trauma, they won't be believed because it just doesn't sound real. And same thing with implanting memories, like you're talking about. There are people who will misremember things, or will have, like, I remember something from when I was very young. I know now that, like, that is not a real memory, but I still have a memory of it.
Yeah.
Which is sort of strange, but it's because I've heard the story so many times that I feel like I remember it through my eyes.
Yeah. And there are ethical issues around, like, not necessarily deliberately implanting memories, but there are cases where people might go to therapy for an unrelated reason, and then their therapist, this has happened, where their therapist has said, like, I think you are repressing a memory of trauma, and then by asking very specific leading questions, it has caused people to have false memories of childhood abuse, and this has led to like families being torn apart over these false memories. And it's not that the person like made it up, right? Like they didn't consciously make up a story about being abused. They had a memory of being abused, but the memory wasn't real.
Right.
So there's a lot of issues around it. And this is a huge part of why I tell people that, like, anyone who talks to me about getting therapy, I always say, like, don't hesitate to find a new therapist if the first person you work with isn't a good fit for you, because there are people who behave unethically in the field, and it's important to take the time to do your research and to work with somebody who you trust and who you feel good about.
Yeah, definitely some bad apples out there.
Yep.
Okay, also, thoughts on doing a video on the psychology behind marketing used by social media sites or apps? For example, keeping you using or checking them. Ooh.
I mean, I think there's validity to arguments about, like, being addicted to social media, because there is certainly, like, a reward circuit that gets activated when you're checking in on social media. You get those likes and you get those retweets. I mean, we could definitely do a video on that.
It's actually something that I've been thinking about as a possible video idea, so you're not far off. But it will require a lot of research, I think, to get a good video out of it. What works of art have stirred you the most? Movie, music, books, comic books, anything goes. Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah. I really love Saga, the comic book series, which you've not been following lately.
No.
But it's beautiful. both artistically and story-wise. I'm a huge sci-fi fan, and I have really, really, really enjoyed the work of Ursula K. Le Guin and Octavia Butler. Octavia Butler has a much more brutal style. She's very, very direct with her storytelling, and there's a lot of violence in her work, but it kind of tells a lot of, like, her parables are really uncomfortable to read in this day and age. And then Ursula K. Le Guin, I 100% believe is the best living American writer and probably one of the best science fiction writers of all time. Although I don't think, she doesn't consider her work to be science fiction. She writes a lot of stories, so in particular her Hainish cycle are these stories about this idea that all humans on Earth, humans are on Earth and there are also humanoid species on all of these other planets throughout the universe, and we all came from one planet called Hain. And now, millions of years later, the Hains have come back to Earth and to all these other planets to say, like, we are our offspring, we are your ancestors, you came from our planet, and sort of creating this intergalactic community of all of these humanoids that originated from Hain. But each of these books is like a self-contained story, and usually she uses this idea of, like, people being from the same history but having evolved completely differently culturally as a way to tell stories about community and culture and otherness. And so it's less about, like, the science and the, you know, it's really not about the science or the technology. It's about people and about the ways in which people treat each other. And I think her work is beautiful. I love Ursula K. Le Guin.
Any other like areas that, or like media that really influence or stir you?
Yeah, I mean, I like film as well. I listen to music. I like to watch movies. Specific movies that I love, I don't know. I'm not, like, super highbrow with film. Recently, like, I really enjoyed Arrival. I really liked Moonlight. But I'm also, again, like I said this earlier about books, I tend to consume media for entertainment more, so I often shy away from super heavy stuff because a lot of the time I'm trying to just kind of get some entertainment. I listen to a lot of podcasts, like Micah mentioned. I listen almost exclusively to Dungeons & Dragons roleplay podcasts because I'm a giant
nerd. From my side, I'll try and do, like, one of each. So movie, it's gotta be Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring.
Really?
I saw it when I was 13, and it just, like, blew me away, I think, in terms of its scope, in terms of the visuals, in terms of the music, just like how it all came together. And I had read The Hobbit, but this was, like, my first exposure to Lord of the Rings, and that was really influential, I think, for me. Music, that's a good question. Well, within the last 10 years, I guess I would say Kanye West's My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, just because I think it opened me to, like, a different way of creating music. Books, that's a harder one for me. I would say probably one of the more recent ones that I read was Lathe of Heaven, and I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, that's an Ursula K. Le Guin.
I really did like that. Comic books, I would say the X-Men series that Joss Whedon wrote. It was really good, but also, like you're saying, Saga is excellent. Movies that really, like, mess me up, though, are, like, Adaptation, Being John Malkovich, like, just, like, some crazy stuff out there. But let's go on to the next question.
Sorry, I'm just looking at people's comments, too. I'll
do this one, because I know how to answer this one. What's the deal with the samples in your video? So, when we started off, we had these background noises where, like, as, like, affirmations or whatever, where it was sort of like Bill Nye the Science Guy almost, where you had, like, this deep voice in the background. And that's all me. That's just me making those noises because I wanted to be a part of it somehow. we've since stopped doing that because people complained about it, or there was mixed, I guess, feedback on whether they liked it or not. But we just decided to cut it out just to keep the content itself pure. So you don't have to worry about that anymore going forward.
Oh, somebody asked a while ago, please make a video on optogenetics. We did that.
We did
that.
Go check it out.
Yeah.
Next question. I'm from India and just about to finish school. I want to pursue a career in developmental neuroscience. How can I apply for it? Do I need to go to medical college first?
That's a good question. Again, I can only speak from my personal experience. So I studied neuroscience as an undergraduate in the United States. And I think that is a very, very different application experience than most people who are applying internationally. If you are applying if you want to study developmental neuroscience, like, are you thinking about finishing? So I'm guessing you're finishing undergraduate. You want to pursue a career in developmental neuroscience. So I would look at graduate programs and look at the faculty at various graduate programs and what the kind of work that they're doing. One of the things that drew me to UCSD was that there were a lot of people doing developmental neuroscience, although that's not as true anymore. And just look at their application requirements. I know that applying as an international student tends to be very difficult because for legal reasons, I don't think you can be considered a resident, which means that your tuition and student fees will always be higher than a U.S. citizen's. But I know that the people I know who came from abroad to study in the U.S. often come with their own funding. Mm-hmm. So if you can find opportunities for funding to study abroad, that's a really good way to kind of bolster your application. Other than that, I would just look at the requirements. I don't know where you're looking at studying, if you're hoping to stay in India or go somewhere else. There are also a lot of really good programs in Europe. I know there are programs in France and in the UK, so definitely check those out. I don't think you need to go to medical college first. But again, it's really going to depend on what you want to do. If you're interested in doing, like if you want to practice, if you're hoping to do clinical neuroscience, maybe going to medical school would be a good idea. But there are joint programs in the United States where you do both a medical degree and a PhD at the same time. It takes about 8 years, but it can be done. Mm-hmm. So you could also look at those kinds of programs. Mm-hmm.
Please make a video where you go through all the books in the library behind you so we can add new titles to our reading list.
Well, our books, these are collections that have been building literally for decades.
Mm-hmm.
Like up here, I have all of my Little House on the Prairie books from when I was a kid. But yeah, we could go through, the ones on a lot of these books are just like fun books. We've got some Tolkien, whatever. But yeah, we could go through some of our books sometime. Maybe do a list of recommendations.
Maybe some of the knickknacks that we got up there too, why they're significant, all that stuff. That'd be fun. All right. What are your thoughts on the current climate of science denial, and what can people who aren't in science do to counter it?
Oh, that's a great question. One of the things that we have, especially in the last year or so, one of the things we have thought a lot about and talked about is just I kind of want to show I'm a person, right? Like I'm a scientist, but I'm a human being, and I go to work and I do my research and I'm trying to do my best job, but I'm still me when I go into the lab. So I go into the lab with all of my own biases and knowledge, and everything about me comes to lab. And science is designed to be an objective process, but that doesn't make it perfect, right? Like people can make mistakes, people can misunderstand results, people can look for things that aren't there. So there's a lot of ways in which science, I understand sometimes why people are questioning science. Mm-hmm. So for me, a huge part of it is just showing I'm a person, I make mistakes, but I'm doing the best that I can. For people who aren't in science, I think it's really just to talk about science openly, to remind people of the benefits of science, and to continue to be excited about it, right? Like to remember that everything we have, like this live stream only exists because of science. Pretty much everything we have is because of science in some form or another.
Right.
And something that I do, I am in science, but something that I would do, for example, is if I see somebody posting something that I know is untrue, I don't try to fight about it, but I might send a link and just be like, hey, just FYI, this is like the latest information on that topic. So that's kind of a way, you probably aren't going to convince the person that is saying, is distrusting science or is speaking against science, But you might convince the people who are looking at that post in the future. You know, if somebody posts something, for example, like anti-vaccine, you can say, hey, here's the latest update on that. Here's a link. And then hopefully other people will see that and understand the reality.
Yeah, I mean, psychology shows that, like, you actually won't change people's mind just by giving them the facts, right? And so what seems to work best is accessing that person's values and culture. So if I have a friend, or if I have an adjacent person, let's say I'm at a party, and I meet somebody new, and they're telling me that maybe they're talking about climate change and saying that it's not real. I might use one of their friends who does believe in climate change to convince them, to help essentially change their mind, right? Because that is accessing their immediate surroundings, the people that are around them, to convince them.
And to talk about the ways in which these things affect them directly. You know, using climate change as an example, you can say, okay, well, you know, if you don't believe in climate change, that's fine, but like, here's a fact about the world, and here's the effect that it's having on you, you know, like, so for example, like 100-year storms are becoming more and more common because of climate change. So like framing it in a way that's like, okay, like let's leave aside whether or not you believe in this thing and just talk about the effects of it and how we can deal with that. So kind of coming at it from an empathetic perspective is really valuable.
Absolutely. All right. Which sort of theory, idea, or school of thought was most surprisingly wrong after gaining a full understanding of psychology or physiology? Or we can also put neuroscience in there too.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to, I mean, there's a lot of different things. I wrote a video once that I can't remember, but there was a field of psychology that like completely, it's like the motivation theory, but I can't remember what it's called. Do you remember? We were just talking about it yesterday.
I know, we were talking about it yesterday.
Ego depletion.
Ego depletion.
Okay, so ego depletion was this theory, and is this theory in psychology, that motivation is a finite resource. So it was based on all this research that showed that if you basically like made someone have like self-control for an extended period of time, it became much harder for them to engage self-control later. And so it was sort of this way of saying like, well, you know, you can't force yourself to be like totally disciplined all the time. It's a finite resource. Sometimes you have to like give in and relax and let that like replete itself. But recently, in the last several years, research has been finding that might not be true, and it has to do with the fact that in a lot of psychology research, like basically it's because when you go looking for an effect, you are more likely to see the effect. So say a researcher does 10 tests with their subjects, but only 3 of those tests show an effect. They're only going to publish the 3 tests that showed an effect, because that's what you publish. You publish positive results. So part of it has to do with the publication system, which is that it encourages positive results. So all of these negative results don't get talked about. So recently, a lot of people have been doing more research and finding that ego depletion might not be a real thing. And it seems like it has to do with whether or not you believe it's a real thing. So if you believe that self-control is a finite resource, you are likely to to experience it as a finite resource. But if you believe that you can just buckle down and do whatever you want and stay self-controlled all the time, you can.
For me, the one that surprised me the most, you also brought to my attention, was the fact that birth order seems to be not a real thing.
Yeah, at least not according to research, like to reliable longitudinal research.
So birth order is this idea that like based on when you are born in your family, that will change your personality in a measurable way. So if you're the firstborn, you tend to be more sort of type A, you know, more responsible, more uptight, perhaps more anxious, all that stuff. Secondborns are more goofy, tend to have more behavioral issues, all this stuff. And it turns out that's totally wrong. Or rather, there's not enough evidence to support that it has that it exists throughout the lifespan. Which is kind of crazy.
And then in neuroscience itself, I mean, like, there were debates on the nature of the brain before we had reliable techniques to look closely at the brain. So like some people thought that all of your nerves were connected, that it was like one long system, basically. But they're not. They're individual cells that then have synapses to connect to one another. So there's a lot. But
all right. Up next, have you thought about making a video about depression?
We are filming one this afternoon.
Yes, we are. You're in luck. How do you see the integration on neuroscience and clinical psychology in the future as we learn more about how the brain intervenes in certain mental illnesses? Ooh.
That's a good question. I think that people sometimes on the two sides of this, in neuroscience and in psychology, often kind of have this sort of like headbutting mentality that they're like two different things and that they're incompatible. As someone who sees, like, I work with a clinical psychologist, I see a therapist, I know the value of cognitive behavioral therapy from a personal experience. I think that as we better understand the brain, it will help us develop more tailored treatments. So, as we understand the underlying causes of certain neurological conditions like anxiety and depression and schizophrenia, we'll be able to better understand individual experiences of those conditions and tailor psychological treatments to that. I really hope that they can be integrated well. That's what I'm hoping to see, is better integration, because sometimes it sort of seems like we're coming from this perspective as like it's only the neuroscience or it's only the psychology, and like you need therapy or medication. And I really think there's a place between the two for most people.
Modern treatments suggest an integration when it's needed, right? And I think that neuroscience has really helped inform the clinical side to a great degree, because we understand more what is affecting the brain and what works to then counter that. So I've seen that it being integrated into my field in terms of like certain things, certain techniques that have evidence to support changing behavior.
Yeah, and I think from that perspective too, neuroscience can also help bolster the reality of mental illness too, because like some people come from this perspective that like anxiety and depression are just in your mind, and if you just like try hard enough, you can get rid of it and get over it. But neuroscience is showing us that these are real things. Like there are measurable changes in your brain when you have generalized anxiety disorder, or when you have major depressive disorder. Like there are things that you can see. So it sort of helps bolster this reality that mental illness is not just like an emotional state or something you can just get over. And I think that's really valuable. I mean, having witnessed depression in people that I love very much and seen how dramatically it can affect your life, and having experienced anxiety, like for me, it was a really huge moment to realize that I really did have anxiety, because I sort of felt like, oh, I can't be feeling as great about my life as I feel and have anxiety. But I didn't know how bad I felt until I didn't feel that bad anymore, So like understanding that these are real things that you can't control can be really valuable for helping people get treatment.
Absolutely. All right. I've not heard of nootropics referred to as just caffeine and electrolytes. I've come across via the Nootropics subreddit it being more things like Bacapa. I'm gonna mess up
I don't know
these.
what any of those things are.
I think the essentially what we're getting to is like the main issue is in the advertising, in terms of how it's advertised to people and what it tries to promise, I think. And we can go into more detail on that in a future video, I think.
Yeah, I mean it's similar to any kind of like herbal or homeopathic treatment, which is to say that like it's not necessarily that there isn't an effect, it's just that it's marketed in a particular way. It has not been really well evaluated clinically. And I think for me, my irritation with it is more that it's like encouraging people to spend their money on things that we really don't know if they work or not.
All right. What is the most important part of our brain?
Ooh.
For neuroscience, that if that part stops, our whole brain will go out.
Off.
Yeah.
Okay.
No deal. No big deal. Wait, no.
No. And what about for you specifically?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the brainstem is what literally keeps us alive.
Right.
If you damage the brainstem, like that's where your heartbeat is controlled, your ability to sleep and breathe.
Yep.
That will literally kill you. From my personal perspective, I mean, I think it really just kind of comes down to like, what do you value? Mm-hmm. Like for me, the part of my brain that matters the most is the part of my brain that makes me me. And I don't know what part of my brain that is, right? But like it's kind of an ethical value question, because like if my brainstem were still functioning but the rest of my brain was dead, am I still me? Like I don't think so. So for me, it's whatever, and I think a lot of people would argue that it's probably like prefrontal cortex, because that's sort of the region of the brain that's most associated with decision making.
Right.
But you also have like your entire limbic circuit, which is all of your emotions, basically, and that connects with your prefrontal cortex, and there's back and forth conversation. So I mean, I really think the whole brain's pretty important. If you damage any one part of your brain, you're gonna have huge issues. Like, it might not be a huge personality change all the time, but it's going to cause problems. Like, your whole brain is important.
Right. Each piece is a part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
What she said. All right. Has there been neuroscientific research into monogamy or polygamy?
Good question. I don't know that there has been, like, I don't know. I haven't really looked into it. I know that there are evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology conversations about the reasoning behind monogamy and polygamy, right? About like what evolutionarily is the value in a monogamous relationship versus a polygamous relationship. But I don't know if anybody's actually looked at like whether or not people who are polyamorous have different brain structures or different signaling than people who are monogamous.
From a neuroscience perspective, there's been a lot of debate that goes sort of back and forth between like monogamy is natural or is unique to humans, or polygamy is actually what humans are, I don't know, genetically set up for.
Yeah.
There was a recent study about people on Tinder who use Tinder, and how I think it's something like, it was on college students, and it was something like 30% of college students who were in a monogamous relationship were also actively seeking relationships on Tinder, which is sort of interesting.
Yeah.
But
it's also really
neuroscience.
It's really difficult to separate, like, even if you did neuroscientific research, it would be difficult to separate social influence from like natural tendencies, because we are just so socially programmed to feel certain ways about relationships. So yeah,
absolutely. All right, Allie, did you go to medical school?
Nope.
All right, have you guys done hey guys, have you done or are you planning to do a video about neuroscience and sexual orientation?
It's a good question. I've actually thought about a number of different approaches to dealing with the neuroscience of gender and sexuality and sexual orientation. It's a really difficult topic. Obviously, it's very controversial in a lot of ways, and I would want to do it very well. So I have hesitated to do that because I would want to do that as a collaboration, because I, as a cis heterosexual white female, I don't know that I would be the best person to talk about it, especially because I don't study the neuroscience of sexual orientation or sexuality. But I am very interested in doing a video or several videos about that topic in the future, because I think that there's a lot of there is research on the topic. I don't know it very well, and there's a lot of conversation to be had on that topic.
Yeah, I think we'd want to do it well, like really put deliberate focus on how we're approaching it. Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay.
All right, well,
we're getting close to the end of our time here.
Yeah, we are, and that's actually the end of our current questions that we have, which works out perfectly. So I guess we can just finish up just by talking about, I don't know, what do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just like, I don't know. We're really excited that we hit 10,000 subscribers.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty incredible, again, that you guys think that what we're doing is worth your time. We really appreciate everybody who came to the live stream today. I mean, we got a ton of questions. I hope that we answered them satisfactorily for you. Please feel free to send us a message or whatever if you've got more questions. And we really hope that we can continue creating content that you're going to enjoy. Some stuff we have coming up. I'm going to try to start making more videos on sort of basic neuroscience topics again. We've had a lot of fun with our sort of interesting, one-off topics and pop culture stuff, and we'll still do that. But I also want to start making videos about stuff like LTP, long-term potentiation, and neuroplasticity, talking about neurological conditions like depression, diseases like Alzheimer's disease, sort of this stuff that we've gotten a lot of requests for, and also things that I know people want to know more about. So, a lot of people know someone, myself included, know someone who has suffered from dementia. So helping people better understand those conditions, I think would be really valuable. So that's something I'm hoping to do going forward.
Yeah, we already have sort of our videos plotted out through like May, which is great. From my side, I want to just continue making content that people really like, and sort of exploring these new topics and growing. It's been great to have the community, and I hope that we can really focus on that community aspect even more and involve all of you in that. And we appreciate your support. It's been really important to us. I think that's what's really kept us going and making more videos, is knowing that we have you watching along with us, that we have you supporting us every step of the way, and it's been really important.
Yeah, and especially a huge thank you to our Patreon supporters. We know our content is free and will always be free as long as we're making neurotransmissions videos. And we know that not everybody can afford to give money to our project, but we really appreciate the people who do.
Yeah.
Even if you can't donate, you should go over and check out our Patreon page anyway, because we do have stuff that's publicly posted there that's not available anywhere else. So you can go and see behind the scenes photos and some funny clips. If you haven't already, you should check out our blooper reel from today, so you can get an idea of what it's like to be on set.
Yep.
And thank you so much to everybody for showing up today and for keeping us talking for an hour and a half. I hope that it was interesting for you.
Yeah, it sort of shows me that maybe we should do more of these Q&As, because it sounds like you guys all have a lot of really great questions, so we might do that again in the future.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for 10,000 subscribers. It's been a roller coaster, and we're looking forward to sort of going on in the next year. 2018 seems to hold a lot of promise. If you want to follow us on Twitter, I just put up our tags down there, and we hope you're all doing well.
Yeah. All right. Until our next transmission, I'm Allie Astrocyte.
And I'm Micah.
Over and
See
out.
you later.